Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. My name is Golshan Javadian. I'm at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. I have the pleasure of hosting EAM's Eastern Academy of Management Learn and Share series this year. And we are very honored to have Dean Shepherd talking to us about a very interesting book that he's written, which actually became the motivation of not just this talk, but the talk series that I developed for this year. So this year's talk series is around entrepreneurial thinking in academia, and we're starting things off with Dean's book on the Aspiring Entrepreneurship Scholar. Even though the book, it doesn't show here, but you see the picture there. Even though the book is written for entrepreneurship scholars, but I believe many of what Dean says in the book is relevant to anybody in any discipline. And today our focus is gonna be on researching like an entrepreneur. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about that, and you will figure out where the resemblance is coming from. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Dean first. He doesn't need an introduction, but I'm gonna go ahead and do that anyway. All right. Dean Shepard is the Ray and Millen's Sickford Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Mendoza College of Business, Notre Dame University. His research and teaching are in the field of entrepreneurship. He investigates decision making involved in leveraging cognitive and other resources to act on opportunities, respond with resilience to adversity, and learning from experimentation, including failure. Dean is a fellow of the Academy of Management. He has been awarded 3 honorarium doctorates from 3 different institutions. From the Entrepreneurship Division of the Academy of Management, Dean has been awarded the Dedication to Entrepreneurship Award and the Mentor Award, and the Foundational Paper Award twice. He is the past editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business Venturing. He has authored over 200 books, over 20 books and 180 publications in top management and entrepreneurship journals with over 72,000 Google sites. So please help me welcome Dean Shepherd, and we are very excited to be talking to him about his book, The Aspiring Entrepreneurship Scholar, Strategies and Advice for Successful Academic Career. So Dean, I'm gonna start by asking you about your motivation in writing this book. And I know that your motivation for writing this book came from your own personal journey as you learned how to do how to publish quality research. Your story is very interesting, but it's not unique because, as you know, there are only a handful of high research universities in the world who accept only very handful of doctoral students every year. So not many scholars have access to the same resources that is available at high research universities. And I know in your book you talk about your motivation on how you personally did not have high published faculty in your dissertation, on your dissertation committee. So you had to learn the publication process on your own. But you talked about how this was a blessing, and you also talked about how even getting rejection letters from journals were a blessing to you. So can you tell us a little bit about that process and why you thought that not having high published scholars on your dissertation committee and getting rejections from journals were a blessing to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a blessing in some ways because you want to have an optimistic perspective on life. Otherwise I'm just going to be a victim of my own training. But I think it's mainly that I had to learn these things myself. So I did my PhD in Australia, and I had wonderful people around me, but they just weren't people who published a lot. And then a friend of mine, Evan Douglas, took me to the USA, to the United States. And from there, had to start learning how to kind of do this publication business myself. And end up working with a peer, Andrew Zacharakis, when I first started off, Zach. And Zach and I kind of learnt this publication process together, which was a lot of fun. So rather than working with a senior person who sometimes would reposition or make minor adjustments to the paper, and you're not really realizing what's happening, we had to do all of those things ourselves. And so, could we have been more successful as a junior scholar if we'd been working with senior scholars? I'd say yes, of course. But, kind of out of adversity, we actually forced ourselves to learn. And through that learning, I think it kind of set us up really well here. Also, I think, everyone always likes to complain about how hard their PhD program was. But mine was really hard. We we had 3 semesters a year. So we had 2 weeks off, 2 weeks off, and 3 weeks off. And during those semesters, I could teach up to about 14 one-hour tutorials a week. So I was actually getting my PhD done before 9 a.m. in the morning and after 4 o'clock in the afternoon and on the weekends. So I think that kind of set me up to learn how to be very efficient in being able to switch from teaching to research and be able to switch from topic to topic. Um, so I couldn't afford to say, hey, today's my teaching day. I'm not doing any research, because if that was the case, I would have no research days. So I think kind of out of that adversity and those constraints, it forced me to be a lot more efficient, such that when I came to the US, my first job, it was a 2-2 teaching load. And they said, I hope that's all right. And I said, 2-2, that sounds like, a walk in the park compared to what I've had in the past. So I think, some of those things that kind of forced me to learn and forced me to be efficient so that when I came to the US, and I think I was in a more munificent environment, I was able to kind of make the most of that munificence and really kind of push along. I,
Okay,
you know,
thank you.
Also, though, I suppose the motivation for writing the book in some ways is when I came to the US, I thought, I don't necessarily have the same training as everyone here. And everyone in the US, they just all seem so smart. So I thought I better work out my own plan. So I created this book, really is just a reflection of more of my rules of thumb. And I'm not saying that everyone should adopt the same rules of thumb that I have, but these are the rules of thumb that I try and use to be able to make decisions quickly and to be able to kind of manage my career as I went through.
Mhm. Very good. Excellent. Thank you. And again, I think the experience that you had is very common among many, because there are only a few handful of universities that are high researched, and they only accept a few doctoral students every year. So the rest of us need to do some learning on our own.
Yeah.
Uh, so what fascinated me about your book, and I'm pretty sure fascinates everybody else who's here, is how you identified how you talked about how identifying research opportunity is similar to identifying entrepreneurial opportunities. And for those of us who are in entrepreneurship field, we know that finding entrepreneurial opportunities requires a set of skills and practices. For example, you talked about leveraging knowledges, how both entrepreneurs and scholars need to build upon their background and inside their shared experiences. You talked about bricolage, how we need to be working with limited resources that we have at hand, by combining and recombining them, creating value or creating scholarship. You talked about how we need to have this intrinsic and pro-social motivation. You talked about self-efficacy, the confidence of asking hard questions, and you talked about experimentation. So I'm gonna ask a few questions as it relates to each one of them. And I think
Okay.
the first question is about the topic, picking the right topic to do research on. And in your book, you talked about how, as a journal editor, you're often asked this question of what is hot in your field now, and you talked about how this is the wrong question to ask.
Yeah.
So, what is problematic about that question?
Yeah. I suppose if it's a hot topic, then you're already too late. And there's also no reason to believe that you're going to be any good at it or better than anybody else at it. So I've kind of refined my thinking on this because when I spoke with Johan Vikland, a good friend, Johan, he would talk about this thing called me search. And really, what I was talking about with idiosyncratic knowledge is really about this notion that we don't do research, we do me search. So we look back at our own background or our values or our history or our journey and we say, how can that kind of inform where, inform the knowledge corridor that I go down in order to look for opportunities? So I think, I can give you some examples of that is my father's business failed, and that caused him a lot of anxiety. It caused us a lot of anxiety too. And I was teaching MBA students at the time when I was a doctoral student, and I was teaching them that, entrepreneurs, businesses fail, but entrepreneurs learn, and that entrepreneurs are just motivated to try again. And that was not the experience with my father. My father was not in a position to learn, and he was not in a position to try again. So I put that idea aside in the back of my mind. And then when I thought I had tenure in the bag when I was at the University of Colorado, I said, I'm going to write this paper just for myself. And in the end, I wrote this paper about how entrepreneurs likely feel grief over the loss of a business because it's important to them, and how that can obstruct their ability to learn and their motivation to move on. And perhaps the psychology literature can help us understand how people deal with grief. And if entrepreneurs can better deal with grief, then they can more quickly remove that emotional obstacle. They can learn from the failure and they can move on. So I think that's a case of me search where I was able to challenge the weakly held assumptions in the literature that entrepreneurs automatically and instantaneously learn from failure and say, no, no, it actually involves a process of regulating your emotions. And so that's one example of this kind of idiosyncratic knowledge. I kind of looked at my own experiences and then I looked at the literature and says, yeah, my experiences don't match with the literature. Maybe there's an opportunity to do research. And so I think, nearly all the research that I really enjoy doing, and maybe most of the research that gets published in the top journals and the ones that I'm most proud of are these kind of me search, or I've adapted it to talk about we search.
Mhm.
So if I sit with my doctoral student, Sarah from South Africa, we talk about a little bit about her background and then we try and find out where opportunities are, where our interests intersect. Um, so her first study was about the abalone industry in South Africa, how poachers were taking the abalone, but creating an opportunity for sustainable abalone. Um, so it wasn't so much about abalone, it was about opportunity variance, but it was looking at her background and relating it to my interests in order to be able to kind of come up with that research opportunity. So I try and do this all the time. I always try and look back at, what makes me unique or what makes other people unique, because we've all got different journeys. And it's
Mhm.
there that I think that we can have one, knowledge that other people do not have that can help guide our research. Whether we include that information in the paper or not, it's not important. And also, we're probably motivated to pursue that topic that we wouldn't be if it was just a hot topic, for example. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't like the idea of hot topics. I always think that you're late to the game and you've got no advantage over everyone else in doing those hot topics. So look internally, I think, for opportunities.
That's very good. I think somewhere in the book you mentioned literature reviews. Somewhere in the book you talked about how you heard this advice from someone
Yeah,
that it's rather than doing literature reviews first, you need to frame your own story first, then do the literature review. This is kind of against what we advise doctoral students. Go do a literature review, find the
yeah,
gap, and then write your research paper. Or somewhere in
yeah,
the book, you were talking about this experimentation. Sometimes just sitting down with our own thoughts
yeah,
can help us better get to the research idea. But how do you suggest people balance that between
Yeah.
what like balancing doing literature reviews and coming up with your own story?
Yeah, it was Evan Douglas, who's a friend of mine in Australia. He's the one who brought me out to America. He's the one who said that. He'd say, I'd think through the idea before I do a literature review. And I'd say to him, yeah, but how do you know it hasn't been said before? And he says, you know me, Dean, nobody thinks like my brain because he's a very funny, strange individual. Um, and he says, the chances that someone would come up with exactly the same thing that I've come up with is very, very low. And so I suppose the advantage there is it allows you to be highly creative. If all you study is the literature, my worry is that all you see is the literature, and therefore you don't see what's missing. Um, there is a risk, of course, but I think what some doctoral students do is they don't know when to stop the literature review because they're worried that I haven't covered everything. And it's probably not important to cover everything. And in some ways, we can do a lot of that, that background fill-in work later. So maybe I can give you an example here of how I do this in practice, is that when I'm writing a paper, I actually write it my first draft by hand. And so I know that makes me like a dinosaur. But when I'm writing a sentence, I write the sentence, and at the end of the sentence, I just put XX. And then I keep going, and then I put XX at the end of every sentences. And the XX means I know that there's a site there. Just go and find it later. And by doing it this way, it makes sure that I tell the story such that the sites are only secondary or tertiary to the story. They are not the story. And I'm not trying to put a patchwork quilt of sites together to tell a story. I'm just telling a cohesive story. And I know the sites are there. So it does require some knowledge to know that they are there and then to go and find them. But I'm not bothered with it at the start. I want to tell my story first, and then I go back and kind of fill in those sites a little bit later.
Mhm. Very interesting, Dean. Let's talk about bricolage now. And this is one of my favorite topics in entrepreneurship research. But I think we come to it very late. We came to it very late, realizing that entrepreneurs work with very limited resources at hand, but their skill is really combining and reconfiguring those resources to create value. And you suggested that as scholars, we also need to work with the limited resources that we have at hand. You wrote this book in 2016, and we are in 2025. I wish I could have told you, hey, Dean, with all the advancements that we have in technology, we have AI and all of that, everybody has access to everything, right? So we all have equal access. I wish I could tell you that we all have equal access as scholars to the resources that we need for our scholarship. But unfortunately, we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
We know, for example, journal databases are not available in
Mm.
every country. We know they are not available to every scholars. We know
Mm.
that workshops, academic conferences are not available to everybody. Like, for example, AOM was held for the first time in Europe this year,
Mm.
not let alone other places. They haven't even stepped foot beyond Europe.
Mm.
Europe was this year was their first year. Or in
Yeah.
terms of workshops, we will say, oh, now there are so much opportunities in terms of workshops like this who are virtual. Everybody can join and learn. But my personal experience, I'm from Iran. Zoom is filtered in Iran. So I know my colleagues cannot easily access even these free workshops that is available for everybody. So we are unfortunately still in an area where we do have limited access to resources, especially in the non-weird context that
Mm.
you're familiar with. So, what recommendations do you have for scholars, specifically in those areas where there are limitations in resources, so they can improve, so they can use bricolage to improve their scholarship?
That's right. Yeah, I mean it's tough when you can't access some of the papers that you need to. I sometimes get emails from people in different countries saying, I really need a copy of that paper, and I'll send them a copy of the paper. Also, one way for people to do it is often also posted on ResearchGate.
Mm.
And so you can normally access that in most locations. But I mean, if you don't have the same resources as other people, what are we going to do about it, I suppose is the question. And I remember one day I was back in Australia and I had internet access problems. And I had like two papers in front of me, and I just said, well, how could I combine these two papers to come up with something interesting? I also did a doctoral course one time where we had, I think, three or four papers, and I said, okay, let's all just sit and write up some research ideas that we could get just by combining these three or four different papers. So I think, the creative aspect of coming up with the opportunity and pursuing it, we can do with limited resources, especially if we're engaging our idiosyncratic knowledge. Um, but in the end, I suppose we have to position it relative to what's in the literature, and we need to be able to obviously access that literature. So it's tough, right? Um, I think the people who are not in that situation also face information overload. You look up a topic on Google Scholar and you'll get like 10,000 papers and you've got to try and sort your way through them. So my approach there is normally, have a general rule of thumb for that, and that is big name, big journal. So if you're going to cite somebody, cite a big name in a big journal. And the reason why I do that is because if the reviewers come back and want to start arguing with you about a particular point that you made, you're inclined to say, don't argue with me, take it up with the big name in the big journal. So in some ways, that's how I kind of filter through the noise, is I try to focus on research that I can really trust by scholars I can trust in journals that I know are highly rigorous um, in the way they conduct their papers. Um, I realize that's not necessarily fair for people who publish in lower tier journals because it's saying, oh, this person's not going to read and cite my work. But you have to realize that there's so much noise out there that we need to have some mechanisms for kind of selecting quality that doesn't rely solely on our own judgment. And that's where that kind of big name, big journal kind of helps me get through those types of things. Um, but I think if you're looking for just a technique for coming up with some creative ideas, bricolage could be something good. If you take something from over here and something from over here, and you think about how you could take pieces of them and combine them or recombine them, and perhaps even use the theories for purposes for which they weren't originally designed, then you might be able to come up with something highly creative. I think, with my dad's was an entrepreneur. His business failed. I took a literature on the psychology of helping people overcome the grief of the death of a loved one. And I combined them in a way which made me kind of have to adapt both of those elements. And in doing so, kind of form something new. So I think bricolage takes the emphasis away from, I'm not just borrowing from a literature. Um, but I'm actually, when I bring something across, it actually changes and adapts in some way. So not only am I making a contribution by having a deeper understanding or solving a particular problem or filling in a gap, but hopefully I can also make a contribution back from where that original literature came from. Because in adapting it, I'm actually transforming it and making it something new. I'm kind of pushing the boundaries of the knowledge, which actually helps kind of contribute back as well. So I'm not just a borrower, hopefully. I'm also a contributor back.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. A lot of us needed to hear that, Dean. And it's not always very common for great scholars such as you to say that it's okay to start small, to start with what you have and build up upon it. And
Yeah.
related to that is when you talked about self-efficacy, the importance of having confidence in our own abilities as scholars, because
Mhm.
that will eventually help our performance, just like the self-efficacy of entrepreneurs that will help them with their entrepreneurial performance. And you talked about very interesting strategies, starting
Mhm.
from small wins, having small wins, how that can help boost our confidence, or the collaborations. I think one of the things that I noticed in your book, from the start of the book, you continuously talk about your collaborators, your co-authors, and how they helped you out. So can you talk to us a little bit about those strategies, the small wins? What do you mean by the small wins? How can they help
Yeah.
us boost confidence? And this collaboration, how can they be helpful?
Sure. Yeah, I think it was White and Bender all talked about building self-efficacy through small wins. For me, and it's none of these strategies are easy because there's always some details that I'm not covering. So for my doctoral students now, we need to really focus on the very, very, very top journals. And of course, we're going to get rejected from those, right? So their self-efficacy is going to get hit to a certain extent. So I try to kind of set their expectations early that very few papers get accepted. But for me, when I was traveling, kind of transitioning from Australia to the United States, I had some wins, like I had some acceptances into some of the conferences. Then I got into some of the best paper proceedings. And then I got a JBV. And then I got an ETP. And then I started to think, you know what? I think I can do this thing. And then as I kept going, then I said, all right, now I'm going to try AMJ and I'll try this and I'll try that. And so we start out, we're not sure we can make it. But if we just do some little things and we kind of give ourselves a pat on the back when we do them. I just got my paper accepted at the Academy Management meetings. Well done. Maybe this will be good. I get some good feedback and just kind of so you try and take the small wins, kind of celebrate them, take them on board. And I think as we build our self-efficacy, we know it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that if I believe that I'm going to be successful at it, then I'm more likely to be successful at it. But also it encourages persistence, right? And so I try to protect my self-efficacy in some way by saying, when I submit a paper, just because it gets rejected doesn't mean it wasn't a good paper. I could have got a reviewer on a bad day. But I don't want to explain it away that way because I can learn from what the reviewer said to make it a better paper. And as I learn, I improve my self-efficacy. But if I have a belief that a paper is a good paper and I'm willing to keep working on it, I believe that eventually a good paper will get a good home. Um, the danger, of course, is you escalate commitment to a losing course of action, that you keep plugging away with the paper for 7 years and you would have been better terminating and moving on to something else. So again, there's a judgment here, right? When should I persist and when should I terminate?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting decision point too, and that's not an easy decision to make.
Very good. And collaborations, what recommendations do you have for, especially for junior and senior scholars who, in terms of authorship teams? Yeah.
Yeah. So as I said, I started off with Zach. If I put my general rule, it was always like I would only have a co-author that I would like to have a beer with.
Mm.
Now, it has nothing to do with beer or alcohol or drinking, but that's kind of emblematic of the type of person I want to work with. I want to work with a friend. I want to work with someone I can trust, we can communicate with each other, that I can change his writing on track changes. He or she can change my writing on track changes, and we trust each other. And so that's kind of like the most important thing. At the start, I didn't work with senior people. I think when you're a junior, it's harder to get a senior person to work with you. But sometimes it can be a very valuable learning experience. So sometimes you might approach a senior person by saying, I have a data set or I have a working paper. And what you do is you do your very, very, very best job on that working paper. And perhaps the senior person might be prepared to look at it and you could ask them to join you on the paper, realizing that they may not do much, but what they do may make the difference between a revise and resubmit and a rejection. And it also gives you an opportunity to learn. The one thing I always try to do, I don't need to do it with my co-authors, but we do it anyway, is we always have a title page on the documents that we're sharing on these working papers. And that's so that never does anyone ever get surprised about what the order of authorship is. Now, I say I don't need to do it with my people because we all work together in what someone leads on one, the other one leads on the other, and it all works out in the end. But I do know a lot of people get into troubles when the expectations of authorship, people are surprised by different authorship orders. And also, whenever I put that title page in, sometimes I'll put the note in saying, but of course we can change this as the paper goes along. Like
Mhm.
just because someone started it doesn't mean that through the revise and resubmit process, one part of the paper requires greater emphasis and we switch authorship. So
Mhm.
I do those things all the time. Um, and it's only because we've got such a good relationship with my co-authors that we're able to do that very freely.
Mhm. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. That's great advice, Dean. My last question is regarding the tenure process. The book has a couple of chapters on that, and specifically on assessment of research for tenure. That's the part that I want to ask a question about. I'm pretty sure you get a lot of requests to do external review for tenure packages. I
Yeah.
want to know, what are the things that you look at? What are the things that you assess? I mean, both in terms of research and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that lots of places say they don't count the number of papers you have, but then they said, any it's very hard to assess quality, but any idiot can count. So when you think about your packet goes to the dean or it goes across campus, people count. So numbers do matter, right? But of course, quality matters as well. So I think you've got to understand what is the list, what your list is within the organization, the university that you're at, or even when you're looking for a job, find out if they have a formal list that they count as A's and A minuses. And if they don't have a formal list, what's their informal list?
Mhm.
And for example, if you're an entrepreneurship scholar and you want to continue doing entrepreneurship research, you need to find out whether Journal of Business Venturing and Entrepreneurship Theory are considered A journals. I
Mhm.
know they are throughout the world. The US, some places are and some places aren't. So it's kind of worth understanding how they see that. Your external assessors will read the papers for quality as well.
Mhm.
Um, so what we look for is we look for number, we look for quality, we look for themes. So if you're got a paper on one topic and another paper on a different topic and three papers on five different topics, then it doesn't look like you're known for something. And
Mhm.
also you may be pulled in different directions by different co-authors, which is not necessarily a good sign. We look for whether how many projects that you've led, because we want to see if you are kind of like the intellectual driver for some of the papers. Um, they also want to see that you've published papers without members of your committee. So have you been
Mhm.
able to kind of graduate from your dissertation related work and be able to kind of form relationships with other people to make publications? Um, yeah. And also, impact is important, right? Although
Mhm.
when you're going up for tenure, it's very hard for your papers to have had too much of an impact at that stage because they've only been around for 2 or 3 or at most say 4 years, 5 years. So that's probably something more that comes up at full professor level than the tenure level. And then the other thing you say is if the person gets tenure, will they stop or will they keep
Mhm.
going? And
Mhm.
so therefore you look at their working papers and you see what stage they are in their working papers and what's going to come through in the future. Um, so they're the main things that we look for.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, Dean. Now it's time for questions from the audience. So if you have a question you would like to ask Dean, please feel free to either raise your hand and put the question in the chat box. I'm gonna take a look at the chat. We have a couple of our EAM fellows and past presidents and other colleagues here as well. Thank you so much for joining today. Eastern Academy of Management is really doing wonderful things, trying to bring that the scholarship taste into the local conferences, and we are very known for collegiality that Eastern Academy of Management has.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Time for questions. Okay, so I see one. This is interesting. So, Rahul has a question for you. He wants to know how can one become as productive as Dean Shepherd? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, you just need to be able to become the best version of yourself. You don't want to become me. That's for sure. Um, you know, it may not even be important to do what I've done. I kind of set myself to say, I want to try and achieve excellence in three things: research, teaching, and service.
Mhm,
And in order to be good at the excellent in research, my teaching, I don't want to teach much, but when I do, I want to be excellent in the classroom. So that's how I kind of combine those two things. And when I do service related to research. So there's all these kind of synergies related there. And I've kind of been very specific the way I've kind of crafted my career to make sure that I head down those directions, because you often can get pulled off in a whole bunch of different directions, and which is fine if that's where you want to go. But I suppose being prepared to say no to certain things, a senior colleague when you're a junior might say, we really want, which happened to me, we really want you to rewrite this, the curriculum. And I'd say, yeah, but I've been told to focus on my research, and I've got to get this paper out by 2 weeks, and I've got to get this thing in by a certain period of time. So I cannot do that.
mhm.
And you also might need, senior people to protect you, like a department head. So if someone asks you to do something, you say, well, no, my department head said I need to focus on these things. So I suppose it's just deciding what's important for you in your career, and then sort of crafting your job and crafting those people around you to enable you to be successful in those elements. But you definitely don't need to do what I did. You've just got to find your own path. Yeah.
Thank you. Kimia, go ahead. Oh, we cannot
You're
hear
you're on
you.
mute.
I'm so sorry. Hello,
That's good.
everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank you both for this meeting, for holding this meeting. It was really insightful. I really benefited a lot from all the points that you mentioned. And next, I would like to mention something related to what Professor Javadian just said in the beginning of the session about Zoom being filtered in Iran. I just found out something. I feel like I need to get it out there to all the fellow Iranians. It's just something I recently found out during this meeting. I got disconnected a lot of times, and then as I was, trying my VPN, I figured out that I just needed it for entering the meeting, and then I just turned it off, and everything works really well for me. I just felt like I needed to tell everyone about this. And
Good.
then I have one question. I'm sorry if this took so long. I would like to know if there are any general paper writing tips that I could get from you in terms of how long we need to, for junior writers, of course, like how long do we need to spend every day on, writing, or how to think like a pro, how to write like a pro. I am a research assistant currently
Mm.
at my university. I have an MBA, but I mean, like you told us a lot of good points about how we
Yeah.
can have an entrepreneurial kind of thinking, but how about pro writing tips? Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Yeah, I think I've got a couple of them. One of them that I mentioned earlier was to write the story and just put an XX where you want to put the sites. That helps me a lot. Also, I think, like an entrepreneur, we need to be novel in some aspects of the business, but not novel in everything. So in writing a paper, you want to be novel in your content, but not novel in your structure. So I think there was a guy, I think Michael Lebacken, said he would look around to find someone that had the right beat or the right tempo or something, and then he would put his lyrics on top of them. And so I would do that too. I would try and, if it's depending on what type of paper it is, I would go and find 2 or 3 exemplars and I would copy their structure. And by copying their structure, I'm not just talking about section headings. I'm almost talking about what goes into the first paragraph, what goes into the second paragraph, what goes into the third paragraph. And when I choose those exemplars, I try to choose them where they don't have content that's similar to the content that I'm writing on, because I don't want to fall into the trap of saying what they said, their content. I want to just follow their structure. So there are different types of papers, and I have different exemplars for them. If I have an inductive study and it's a multiple case study, then there's some Eisenhardt papers, or if it's a process study, it's a Langley paper, or if it's it's a review and research agenda, I go to Academy Management Annals or some of the JOMs, and so I just keep searching and say, yeah, that's roughly the sort of structure that I think would fit well with what I'm working on, and I kind of copy that structure. I would also say that English is my first speaking language, even though I'm Australian. It's still English speaking. We write in the journals as like American English, not English, not with commas and brackets. It's very active, very short sentences, very punchy. And even though English is my first language, I still often use a copy editor to just fix up those tiny little things at the end just before I submit. They shouldn't make much of a difference, but I'm pretty sure it does. So if you're a non-English speaker, then I couldn't imagine not using a copy editor. But I know there are differences in resources. It may not be possible. The other thing I would like to just say, Kimia, is Johan Wicklund, who's the editor of ETP, said to me that he was optimistic about AI because he thinks that all the researchers that are there in the world who are non-English speaking, who are doing excellent research, but are being rejected because some of the grammatical errors or the confusing writing, that AI will be able to improve that so that English language is no longer kind of a necessary requirement in order to get published. And it might actually kind of open up the world to excellent research that's previously been rejected. So writing's important. You just keep working away on it. But there's some of the tips that I would use. There are also some books. Anne Huff had a book a long time ago about scholarly writing, and Tim Pollock has a book on scholarly writing, and so I think they would be worth looking at as well.
Thank you so much. Sure.
Oh,
Thanks.
one other thing I think from the editors at AMJ and also JBV and ETP, there's lots of good advice on how do you write an introduction, how do you write a literature review, how do you write a discussion, right? So I think there's quite a few resources available for those sorts of things.
That's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I can share those resources that Dean talked about if you reach out to me. And Kimia, thank you for the Zoom tip. Now I know that I will
Sure.
share your tip
Thank
with
you
other
so
folks
much.
who can
Yes. And
join
I
us.
will reach out to you definitely for the resources. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. So there's another question in the chat box that we didn't cover, so I like us to talk about this. So this is my first time actually hearing this. So they're talking about they're asking, how do you know when to submit a paper? And they talk about this percentage. It's new to me that they say you should try to submit when you think the paper is 85% done. Have you heard about that?
No, I mean it's kind of like different personalities are different things. So I'd have one doctoral student once who was a perfectionist and wouldn't give me the paper because it wasn't perfect. And I said, I don't want a perfect paper. Give me your crap. And of course, when I get it, it's like 95% done, right? Where other people are a lot sloppier. And for them, I say, don't send it to me until you are 100% happy with it. So different people have different ways of being able to do it. But look, the chances of getting a revise and resubmit at the top journals is so low that you really want to have it as good as you can have it before you submit. Not so good that you never submit it, not so good that you take years finishing it off, but you think, well, what needs to get done and to get it done? And sometimes I've worked with some excellent scholars that I've admired, and I've involved them in some of my papers. And before I even send them a copy of the paper, I get it as good as I can get it. Because then when they make changes to it, they're making changes that I would not have made, or they're not just kind of making up my mistakes. Or when they read the paper, they're impressed to say, yeah, this person works hard on things. Yes, there's someone I can work with. So I think personality wise, it has a lot to do with it. You don't want to be a perfectionist and never let it go. But you don't want to be sloppy either, because the reviewers will reject it for sloppiness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. David.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. First of all, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. So I'm a PhD student from Germany, first year. And just like 15 minutes ago, you mentioned or you explained how to impress a senior to get a co-author. I'm currently thinking about organizing a PhD research stay abroad, and therefore I would like to ask you, how long should a research stay should be in order to be interesting for the host supervisor? So is it like 3 to 4 months, or because
Right.
me, for example, I can get funding for a whole year, but that may be too long?
Yeah.
And what is the right time for a PhD student to plan a research stay abroad?
Yeah. So I've done this quite a bit, but I've done it through the following method. I would have doctoral students that were being supervised by from co-authors of mine. And I do that because then I could say to the co-author, is this a good doctoral student or not a good doctoral student? Or is this someone who works hard or someone doesn't work hard? And so that kind of made sure that the people that came and visited me were good. They would normally come, David, for an unusual reason, for 3 months or less. And that's because, I don't know if I should say this because I'm not sure it's good legal advice, but if you come for less than 3 months, I think you can get away with not having a visa. But I'm not a lawyer, so don't. But anything over 3 months, I know that you definitely must get a visa. So I don't want to even talk about visas. It's so complicated, but that's how we've worked with it in the past. And then a lot of them were German PhD students from Holger Patzelt and different people. And there we would always say, we'd help them, Holger and I would help them design the study that they were doing for their dissertation. And then we'd say, okay, come over and visit me when you have your data. And when you have your data, we can talk about how do we analyze it. We can talk about what the story is. We can talk about writing paper. We're in a position to do stuff. But if you come without the data being collected, then this is assuming we're working on something empirical, but that's what it's going to be most of the case. We may not be achieving a lot. The only other opportunity, I suppose, David, is that you could visit and sit in on some of the PhD seminars. That's usually useful. And it's also useful sometimes just sitting in on some of the classes when they're teaching an undergraduate or an MBA class, just to see how teaching's done in the US, because it's different than it's done in Germany. And so all those things are a good experience. But, I think, like a semester is 14 weeks long. I think that sounds like about a right amount of time. But, different people will have different attitudes towards it. But that's mine. I always think it's most productive if you come with your data. But hopefully we've worked together before that with your supervisor to make sure the data's good. And so that's the most productive way, I think.
Maybe just one following question, pretty short.
Go ahead.
But should I build up a relationship to a supervisor host, for example, in the US before I collected my data or afterwards?
Before, preferably, because then we can make sure the data's good. And then I would look at the connections that your chair has in Germany. What connection? Who are they connected with in the US? And I think that's your best networking way of trying to get there. Because like me, if I hear from your supervisor and I know your supervisor, then I can ask them about you. And if the words are positive, then the exchange can happen.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next question in the chat is kind of related to experimentation, where you talked about in your book about reading diverse literature, and they're talking about how if there are students specializing in a different area but they want to consider entrepreneurship, what recommendation do you have? And I think you're in favor of this interdisciplinary work thing.
Absolutely. You look, I always try and think, I always use these kind of general rules, and it seems like I'm black and white, and maybe I am, but there are different ways to do it. This is just the way I do it. I always think about in a deductive paper, there are two literatures. There's a literature in the introduction, and there's a different literature in the theory section. And the literature in the introduction is the literature which has a gap or which has a problem or it's been problematized, right? So that might be the entrepreneurship literature. What we know in the entrepreneurship literature, what we don't know in the entrepreneurship literature, and why it's important to fill that gap in the literature. Then the other literature is what I'm going to use to try and fill that gap. Or it might be two literatures that I combine together to try and fill the gap. The reason why I think I try and force myself to think about two literatures rather than one is because how can we make a theoretical contribution using the literature to fill a hole where that literature is the literature that has the hole, you know? So I try and think about it that way. And so the more that literature comes from some discipline or from some other place, then maybe it can provide, you know, in the end, we want to make a novel contribution. It can make a more novel contribution. And as I said before, we're not just borrowers. As I take that from a different discipline and I apply it to entrepreneurship, maybe entrepreneurship's extreme in a whole bunch of different ways, like in terms of uncertainty and resource scarcity and different things like that, that we actually need to adapt that theory coming across in important ways so that it could actually make a contribution back to that particular literature. So when I think about what my four major contributions are, they are to the entrepreneurship literature, to the entrepreneurship literature, to the entrepreneurship literature, and then back to the originating literature. Doesn't always work. Doesn't always work, but that's what I try and think about doing. So yes, different disciplines, different approach, and this goes for all topics in business. I think that as long as you're consistent in what that kind of that theory coming across is.
Very good. Danielle.
I think you're on
Danielle, we cannot hear you. No, we cannot hear you. You're not on mute, but for some reason we don't have your sound.
It might be all the ocean waves in the background.
Yeah. It's relaxing. No, we cannot hear you.
So maybe he can type it to you, do you think?
Yeah, feel free to type your question in the chat because I think your audio is not working. Sorry. But we had another question in the chat. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I lost my screen. There were actually a couple of questions about narrowing down research topics, or how much should we narrow down the research topics? Isn't it gonna help us with identifying opportunities, or narrowing down research opportunities is gonna actually limit us?
Yeah. If I interpret the question appropriately, I think Trent and I wrote an editorial for ETMP once about this, that, you know, you can either go broad, but you have to be shallow, or you have to be narrow, but go deep. Because a paper you can think about has a certain amount of area. So it can be that way or it can be that way, but it can't be both, right? And unfortunately, sometimes reviewers ask us for both. Like if you're shallow and broad, they go, well, we want you to be deep. And sometimes you narrow and deep and they go, well, can't you be broad? And so a paper can only do certain amounts. So it's a matter of setting up the boundary conditions. But in many ways, I think you're safer being narrower and deeper rather than shallower and broader. And by narrow and deeper, I mean, you're looking at more of the richness in the interrelationships and the interactions and kind of the context and the contextual elements. I think you're a lot safer going narrower and deeper. Um,
Mm.
and then if reviewers ask you to keep going broader, I mean, you've got to just somehow say in your paper, these are the boundary conditions of my study. And if people want to go broader, then in the future research section, we might be able to expand into different areas. But you can't possibly do everything in one paper.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'd say narrower, deeper is a safer route to a novel contribution.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I have one more question for you. There are a couple of questions about writing tips, how to get started. I think we talked about that, but what I'm gonna do, some of the resources that Dean shared, I'm gonna email them to everybody here. I'm gonna email the link to Dean's book that we discussed today, and Dean also actually has a couple of free books as well. They are mostly on entrepreneurship, but I'm gonna also email those out along with other resources that are good for writing, or they're asking for templates. I will share those resources. But the question that is that we didn't discuss is, which is interesting, is about getting rejected from senior scholars. And Miranda is talking about how she's finding no luck reaching out to senior scholars, wanting to work with them, and it's been hard to get them
Yeah,
on board.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard because senior scholars have different motivations, right? I mean, they're doing other things. Firstly, they might be looking after their own doctoral students. They might be the department head. They might be editors on journals. They might be doing executive teaching. They might be drawn off into a whole different things. I mean, the way senior scholars, I still think, want to be able to publish. So if they can look at your work and see that that has the potential to be publishable, then I think you might have a chance. But I suppose if I want to publish something, I want to do something which is not going to require me to learn a new topic in many ways. Like the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So you'd only go to senior scholars with a topic that's central to their identity and that they can add to it. So I started writing on resilience, and I approached Kathy Sutcliffe with the paper. I gave her my best effort, and she saw potential in it, and she worked with me on it. And I've done that same with Sally Mateless on sense making, and so in different ways because it relates directly to who they are, and they are so knowledgeable about that topic that they can with minimal effort kind of help improve the paper. But it can be tough. And maybe, in some ways it's better to go with a peer because the junior scholars are hungrier and they also have less opportunities offered to them. And so, as I said, I started off my career just working with Zach. He was a year above me, but we worked together. We enjoyed working together. We celebrated together when things went through, and we learned everything ourselves together. So it's not necessary to have a senior person. Senior people don't always do a lot to a paper, but what they do might be important. So if you can't get a senior scholar, look towards maybe, someone who's a senior assistant professor or maybe an associate professor, because they're still pushing hard on their publications to get promoted.
Very good. Thank you. Dean, I said the last question, but actually there's one more question I want to ask that we did discuss. There were a couple of questions about what recommendation do you have for folks who want to start a PhD program? So they're coming from the industry with several years of work experience. Now they want to start a PhD program. What do you recommend to them in terms of identifying the right program,
Sure.
the right research path and all of that?
Yeah. So I have most of my experiences in the US, a little bit in Australia, a little bit in Europe. In Europe, there's kind of one PhD, but two paths. One of them's more an academic path. You want to become a professor, or you want to go an industry path. You want to go back to industry. I don't know much about the industry path because we're normally focusing on becoming an academic and publications and things like that. So I would look at It's almost like a mentor system. So you really want to try and find someone who has kind of similar interests to you based on what research they're doing. Um, Try and speak to their past doctoral students just to find out what they're like to work with. When you go for a job, your supervisor's reputation is going to be important, but so is the reputation of the university that you go to. Um, Also, the country where you do it. If eventually you want to live in a specific place, then maybe you want to get a PhD from that country. Or you might want to go to the United States for a while because you know that'll help you get a job going back to the country where you're from and be able to jump a few rungs on the promotion ladder by being away for a little while. I think that's the main thing. You want to learn from someone who has expertise in being able to do it and
Mhm.
someone who is a nice person and try and find that out from their other doctoral students. On the writing tips, also, Johan Wickland and I wrote a paper in Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice. And it's kind of like, I think we talk about the simple rules for research. And a lot of that had to
Mhm.
do with, the exemplars and even I think we even talked about how to write, copy editing and stuff like that. So I think that paper covers a lot of that ground as well.
Yeah, that's a really good article. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna actually download it and email it to folks for those who do not have access to databases,
Absolutely.
if that's okay by
Absolutely.
you. What I'm gonna do, I'll also put this recording on YouTube and share the link for those who registered. I'll
Right.
also share the link on LinkedIn. And as I mentioned, all the other resources that he mentioned, along with his books, I will email it out to everybody. Again, talking about bricolage, but we also have to help each other
Yeah.
get more access to these resources. And I really want to thank you, Dean,
Mhm.
for this conversation, for accepting my invitation twice, actually, this month. Both very insightful conversations. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Sure.
I'm going to share one quick thing about the upcoming EAM events, and then we're done. So again, as I told you, this series was inspired by Dean's book on how to be an entrepreneurial scholar. But we also have a session on teach like an entrepreneur in February and also make an impact like an entrepreneur. So in that session, we're going to talk about service. So I encourage you to also sign up and register. If you don't have me on LinkedIn, add me on LinkedIn. My goal is not to increase my network, but I feel like it's a really good place for us to share these different opportunities. And I share all the links to the recordings and the upcoming events that places like Eastern Academy of Management or AOM's Global Scholar Committee has. I will share those information on LinkedIn. Also, the registration, the call for paper for Eastern Academy of Management is up now. You can submit your papers up to January 19. The conference is going to be held in New Jersey this year. We have a lot of different tracks from traditional conversations from entrepreneurship to OB, HR, but we also have a lot of teaching related tracks as well as idea incubators and posted. So I encourage you guys to participate and submit papers to Eastern Academy of Management. Eastern Academy of Management is an affiliate of Academy of Management, but we are more well known for our collegiality and the networking opportunities that we bring out to the scholars. So this is it for today. Thank you everybody for joining us. Dean, again, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate it. Thank you everybody. Until next
Bye.
time. Bye. Bye.